Up next, as promised, if you're concerned about heart disease, I know you're going to love our next guest. I want you to meet Dr. Daniel Cobb and his amazing presentations about a top secret reason for heart disease, plus a heart rescue therapy that's been censored for years. No doubt Western medicine would like you to believe the fat cholesterol plaque development theory of heart disease, but Dr. Cobb will illustrate a fatal flaw to this idea. In addition, while we recognize that most people have been taught to fear plaque deposits, you won't believe why having plaque is actually better than the alternative, plus an urgent message for heart patients. And finally, are you taking a baby aspirin for heart health? If so, listen carefully to Dr. Cobb as he reveals the shocking scientific truth about why taking aspirin is a big mistake. Enjoy this presentation with Dr. Daniel Cobb. Okay, so, Dan, I've mentioned it before with a lot of other people, but this has been a big effort, I know, for you to get here from all the way across the country, especially with all this COVID stuff that's going on. So I really, first of all, want to say how much I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
And I'm glad to be here.
So
I'm glad I made the right decision here.
No, I am very happy you're here. So for those who, I think a lot of people out there may not know you like I do, we go back many years now, talk a bit about your beginning, your professional career, the things that you had learned, who your teachers were, and brought you to the kind of medicine that you're practicing today.
Well, I got started in medicine pretty late in life, and my very first teacher was some bad luck. At the age of 37, I was very sick. Chronic fatigue, pesticide poisoning, 13 amalgam fillings. I was never a complete basket case, but I was getting close real fast. And I actually lived in Florida at the time. And with pesticide poisoning, you do not want to live in Florida. I actually had there was an acupuncturist that I saw, and he treated me, and he finally gave up. He said, "You cannot live in Florida. You got to move. You got to move somewhere on the dry side of the Rocky Mountains, and you treat it like a dry sauna." And so I ended up moving to, the first place I moved was Sedona, Arizona. But within a year, my life changed dramatically. One is I moved to, first I moved from Florida to Sedona, and then within the year I moved to Prescott, Arizona. I got married, inherited some kids, got a mortgage. It was like this giant slap in the face. And I also got the 13 amalgam fillings out at the cost of about $3,500. And I think the fillings coming out was the beginning of an event of 6 months where I gained more health. I improved my health more than at any time previously and any time since. And first, my wife wanted to go to school. So she, as I was working on my health, she was going to school, and she finally graduated. And I thought, now it's my turn. And so I thought I was going to go to naturopathic school, because there was a naturopathic school in Phoenix. But they kept changing the rules on what you had to do to apply there. And I finally just said, what about acupuncture school? And the first question I did when I called up this acupuncture school in Santa Fe, which is where I live now, was how long before I can apply? And they said, how about right now? Okay, all right. And so moved to Santa Fe, and at this point, I was several years removed from being close to a basket case. It took me about 3 years. I really worked at it. It was my second job. I had my first job, and then this was my part-time job. And, all organic, pure water, pure air, exercise every day. I've tried everything, and I stuck with the things that worked for me. So by the time I got to acupuncture school, I was actually relatively healthy, and actually healthier than some of the other students. That when you go through a hard time and you start paying a lot of attention to your health, sometimes you get considerably healthy than those people that never really experienced a really bad stretch of health. And 3 years, I got my license. Now, my license is acupuncture, and my license is through New Mexico, which has the very best acupuncture license in the whole country, the widest scope of practice. You can do just about anything except prescribe controlled substances, that would be drugs, and you can't do surgery. And mostly what I do isn't even acupuncture. I haven't inserted a needle in 8 years. Sometimes I have a touch needle, but I don't even use that much. Mostly what I do is about what got me back my own health, which is nutrition, detoxification, and control of the environment. I've also, and I learned this before I even went to school, I'm also a very good muscle tester.
Dan, the reason why I had you come out here, though, is because I know that your perspective on heart disease is unique, it's insightful, and I think it complements a lot of the other people that I have as part of this event. So let's start off by just having a few minutes, you present what you see as a really big problem with the way conventional Western medicine is talking about heart disease. Start us off with that, all right?
Okay. Well, I'm going to, as a setup to that discussion, right, what I want to do is talk about how blood flows through the vascular system. And then we'll use that as a tool to dig into that real question. So we got a couple of things here that are worth making note of, like pressure. Okay? Now pressure in the vascular system, it starts out high. In other words, as the blood is coming out of the left ventricle, out of the heart, into the aorta, and it also goes into the coronary arteries at that point, it's high pressure. Now, and any book, any anatomy and physiology book will give you pretty much the same answer. It starts out high and it drops off. And then it gets into the veins and it's lower and lower. And as it heads back to the right side of the heart, it gets very close to zero. Some of the books even say it goes lower than zero, and that the only way the blood gets back is by stealing kinetic energy from the movement of your lungs when you breathe. But anyway, in any case, it's very low. Very high when it comes out of the heart, it goes to very low. So the veins are very low pressure, the arteries are very high pressure by comparison. Now, the next thing is a pulse. There's a pulse in the arteries. And that's a sort of a collection of blood that's more in one place, and it actually stretches the artery, so that's why you can feel it, because it's the big amount of blood that's going by at that moment, but it stretches the artery because it's more than that artery usually contains when there's not a pulse there. So it's sort of scouring the edges. And the next thing is speed. The speed in the arteries is more than twice the speed in the veins. And there's something that goes along with the pulse and speed, which is turbulence. When you have a pulse going by, you're creating turbulence. You can see this in a mountain stream. When there's a lot of water going by, there's a lot of backwards and forwards movement. It's really scraping things up, and the water's moving fast in not always the same direction. Okay, but it tends to be in areas where there's no deposits of sand. When things get calm later on in the stream, that's where the silt drops out and the sandbars are formed. But where there's a lot of turbulence, that doesn't happen. So the turbulence is high in the arteries. There's a pulse. The speed is high in the arteries, and the pressure is high in the arteries. Now, on the veins, it's calm, slow, no pulse, no turbulence, almost no turbulence. Okay? Now, the reason why I bring that up is because conventional medicine wants to tell us that plaque deposits are heart disease. Okay? And they know what causes plaque deposits: high blood cholesterol. So what I want to do, and I usually do this with my live shows, live talks, I get a volunteer, and since you're the only person in the audience, you get to be the volunteer.
That's okay.
Okay, and I want you to imagine that you're in a pristine vascular system. There's no plaque deposits whatsoever, but that this person has high blood cholesterol, and some of that cholesterol is going to fall out of circulation because it's implied that the blood can only hold so much cholesterol in circulation, and some of it's going to fall out and stick somewhere. So now I want you to tell me, are you going to stick where there's high speed, pressure, turbulence, and a pulse, or are you going to go to the slow side where things are pretty lazy and easy and no turbulence and no pulse?
Right. Common sense would tell, I think, anybody that it would stick to where it's calm. So
Okay.
it can grab hold.
Yeah, oh yeah, you don't get scraped off.
Right. Did I get the answer right?
Oh, well, you got the answer right. Okay, but now, then, the next piece of cholesterol comes along, and because it's already sticky, it's easier to stick something that's sticky than something that isn't sticky. So, we're going to build that cholesterol deposit, and it's going to turn into a plaque deposit, right? Maybe a week or two or a month later. Okay, then now we've got a plaque deposit, and it's a pathological thing, right? Because we know that plaque deposits are pathological from listening to conventional medicine. Okay, so now we have disease. Now we're going to name the disease. Okay? Now I'm going to give you the first couple words, and then you're going to fill in the blank. Hardening of the...
Arteries.
But now, Jonathan, that's not what you agreed to.
You're right, and I hope people are following what we're doing here. We're having fun with it, but it's an important point we're bringing out. Don't let me interrupt.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay, because Jonathan agreed that he would stick in the veins. So the disease that Jonathan has described is actually hardening of the veins. Now, have you ever heard of hardening of the veins?
No.
Okay, well, there's a good reason why. Because it never happens. But what you have heard of is hardening of the arteries. And because that's what happens all the time. But if we look at cholesterol falling out of circulation as a passive system, it almost can't happen in the arteries.
And just to go back, Dan, for a moment to really crystallize this, no pun intended.
Right.
But the idea that you're right, conventionally speaking, it just keeps collecting, because the conventional wisdom, in quotes here, is that we're supposed to stay away from cholesterol and cholesterol in foods and just cut out all of this fat, which we've heard about for decades, which has cholesterol, animal fats, and the cholesterol that's in it. Stay away from all that so it doesn't collect, like you say, magically getting deposited into the arteries. That's what everyone's been taught. You're right.
That's right. But you've identified the problem in the logic, which is that it makes sense. If that's exactly what's happening, then we would expect to see disease after disease, patient after patient have plaque deposits in the veins, not in the arteries. So now we know that what we do see patient after patient is plaque deposits in the arteries and not in the veins. So we know there's something wrong with this conventional wisdom, right? It needs a much better explanation. And now my purpose for doing this, okay, is that most people have in their mind an idea of what heart disease is and what causes heart disease. And if I didn't bring out this very significant logical problem with the conventional wisdom, and I talked about my other explanation for heart disease, after an hour and a half or 2 hours, they might be entertained, but they might not be convinced.
Dan, you've done it in about, 9 minutes or so. Us breaking this down, it doesn't seem to make much sense. And I hope people stay open-minded with what more you're about to say. Let's break it down a little bit more for people now, get into some of the juicy stuff. What exactly is heart disease then? How do you see it?
Okay. Well, first of all, let's look at, for an example, let's say if you had a little pinprick, little pinhole in a major vein and a little pinhole in a major artery, which one would you worry about?
Well, right away as I'm thinking about it, sounds a little bit more scary, or quite a bit more, to have that hole in the artery where you would just think blood squirting all over the place.
Right, because in the vein, the pressure is low. If you do nothing about it, you might lose a couple of drops of blood in a week. But in the artery, blood might be pushing through there so fast that it might sort of tear it open a little worse. And then you could really die in an hour. So, and your body knows this. So it knows, first, that your arteries are more important. And they have to be protected. But your body intervenes well before it gets that bad. Because the pinhole that could kill you. But even before it gets close to that, the body has to intervene. And now, heart disease is not plaque deposits. I'll explain what plaque deposits are in a little bit. But heart disease is actually damage to artery walls. And artery walls get their strength and resilience from collagen fibers. And collagen fibers have a formula. And it's just like baking a cake. There's a couple of ingredients. But what you want to know, let's say the list of ingredients was sugar, salt, flour, butter, and saffron, there would be a critical ingredient. What do you think the critical ingredient would be in that formula? What's the hardest one to get? Well, saffron, Okay. Okay, because all the other ones, almost everybody's got. Saffron is a spice that costs about the price of gold and it's hard to get. So, but like there's a formula for making collagen fibers, and it has about 5 things to it, 6 things. But there is one critical ingredient, because just like the flour and the water and the sugar, that tend to be almost in anybody's kitchen, there are certain things that are almost always available. There is one critical ingredient, and it's vitamin C. So when we talk about nutritional treatments for heart disease, we tend to talk about the vitamin C therapy. And it's not because it's the only part of addressing this problem, but because it's the number one thing that tends to be missing.
I don't want to lose anybody here, Dan, and I don't think we are, but this is so important. We're going to get into another conversation of ours. Is going to be about the Pauling therapy and everything that is required, not just the vitamin C. That'll be for something else. But what you're talking about that no one seems to be asking enough yet is what is causing the buildup in the arteries. Why is this happening? You're right. Conventionally speaking, everybody's learning cholesterol's bad, plaque is bad, it shouldn't be there, it endangers people's lives, and just stick a stent in there, bypass it, whatever it's been in the past for decades. Nobody's talking about why it's collecting there to begin with.
All right. Well, let's look at, let's think about arteries. And you just moved your arm, okay? When you moved your arm, you stretched and twisted some arteries. That's a mechanical stress. You're shaking your head. You stretched and twisted some arteries on the side of your neck. When you blink your eyes, these are smaller arteries in your eyelids, but you're stretching and twisting and turning and putting mechanical stress. Mechanical stress is just part of an artery's life. You cannot avoid it unless you totally stop moving. And mechanical stress causes damage. Now, those collagen fibers that we were talking about, they're giving strength and resilience. They're getting stretched and twisted and broken and damaged, and they need to be replaced in a constant turnover. There needs to be, because there's constant damage, there needs to be a constant repair process. And it's if you can sort of imagine, let's say the damage is over here and the repairs are over here. And if they're sort of track each other, we're healthy. And even if there's some variation, if over time, over a week or two, they tend to be roughly equal, if you go out and do some real heavy exercise, you're going to get more damage. But then you eat a good meal and your repair, when you go to sleep, it catches up. You end up in good shape.
Dan, just for a moment, if I can jump in, absolutely what you're saying is so right on. We don't want anyone listening to this to freak out that stress is so bad and you should avoid it at all costs. That's not what I'm hearing from you, and I hope people get that message from you loud and clear. It's about that balancing game, right? That's what you're talking about.
Well, let me give it to you in a different way, okay? Let's say you're out watering your lawn, and this is not something you would normally do, but let's just imagine that it really did happen, that you put that hose, that garden hose, on the ground while the water was still running, and you decided that you're just going to jump on it over and over again until it falls apart. How long do you think that's going to take?
Not long.
Not long. I mean, maybe 30 minutes, maybe if it's well constructed, okay? And the water's going to be spurting out. And this is an analogy to a blood vessel. It's got an outer layer, and it's got liquid on the inside. And if it takes enough mechanical stress, it just falls apart. But our arteries are doing the same kind of thing. They're taking stress. Now, maybe not as much as they just got, that hose got in 30 minutes, but they're taking much more stress over a longer period of time, and they last for 7, 8, maybe 9, or even 10 decades, okay? And what's the difference between our arteries and that hose is our arteries are self-repairing. We have a repair process, and if that hose was self-repairing, it would have lasted a lot longer. And that's the whole idea, is we have vitamin C creating, and other nutrients, which we'll get to at a later section, creating collagen fibers to replace those that have become damaged. And it's an ongoing process. It's always going on. And in almost all people, you keep up with the damage, you're fine. And the only problem occurs when you don't keep up with the damage. When something happens, maybe something about, let's say here, damage and repair, let's say the damage goes up. Let's say you decide, oh, I think it'd be a great idea to start smoking cigarettes. Damage goes up. Or you think, oh, I think it'd be a great idea. I don't think I like vegetables anymore. And the repair process goes down. So that instead of being sort of even, now the damage is almost constantly ahead of the repairs, and you start getting a backlog of repairs. Now, what's the major job of an artery?
Well, I mean, I guess you could say you want to have those healthy channels to bring the blood everywhere it's got to go, and you don't want it leaking, you don't want it breaking down, you want it to be vital and healthy and happy.
Right, okay, well, I'll even put it, in a more precise way. The major job of a blood vessel is to contain the blood. So it has to have its wall in good shape. Otherwise, blood's going to start to leak out. And that can be catastrophic.
I know we have a final message in a couple minutes or so for the cardiologists out there, probably for the general public as well, but such an important message that we really need to have this kind of a conversation more with more people, between each other and between doctors and patients. Really got to talk about this mechanical thing, because what you're describing is such a degree of problems for people. The glyphosate, the sugar that people eat, the alcohol, the medications, the lack of good quality food they're having, the lack of good nutrients, the vitamin C deficiencies. So we have all the things that we need to stay healthy are getting more and more down. The toxicity is going up, which is actually making it harder for us to absorb the nutrition that we need where we need it. So we've got a really vicious cycle that has to be unwound.
And you're absolutely right. It's a very complex, I made it very simple, saying cigarettes or no vegetables, but it's much, much more complicated than that. You're absolutely right. But it all boils down to how much damage is happening to your arteries, in this case, and what's your repair capacity.
And Dan, just for a moment, so it's like really getting sensitive to how sensitive and intelligent our body is. Like what you were saying before about how the body knows when this damage is taking place and the inside or our artery walls, for example, have just taken on too much stress and it's starting to break down. Even before it gets that hole and the blood is spurting out, the body knows to go to try to repair itself.
Right. And now we're getting into the plaque deposit, because even before the damage gets to the point where it might break through, okay, the body knows, oh, this is dangerous. And it knows that if it really does happen, you don't have long to live. So there is a plan B. There is a what is probably intended to be a temporary adaptive response. Well, what we're going to do is where the artery is the most damaged, we're going to coat the inside, and we're going to give it a protective coating to sort of fend off the force of the blood pressure and the pulse, and so that it doesn't further damage that artery wall at that point. Now remember, our arteries flex, they move. So that coating has to be flexible. If it was made out of a mineral, you know, like it would break. Like if it was made out of calcium entirely, it would break. So it has to be flexible, and it has to be sticky because we want it to stay there. It has to go to a certain spot. And we don't want it to be water soluble because we don't want it to just quickly absorb back into the blood. Now, do you know what I've just described? It's a plaque deposit. And it's saving your life. It is an adaptive response. It's not the pathology. It's not that the bad guy in this equation that conventional medicine is telling about. It's actually saving your life. It's not there by accident. It's there on purpose.
But also, just to clarify, I mean, I was thinking as you were describing this, though, even though you say it needs to be flexible, it's got to be sticky, all these things. I would imagine, though, still, for years, if this is happening to someone, it's still not the ideal world in terms of the vitality, the flexibility of a clear, healthy artery. This hardening of the arteries, even though it's not a piece of steel, it is a thicker, less vibrantly healthy artery. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely true. And it eventually, I mean, if you take it to its final conclusion, it might contribute to your own death. But if it does that, it would be 20 or so years after you would have died from bleeding out if it wasn't formed.
Sure, and in most of the heart attacks people should understand or appreciate really are not this slowly, maybe you want to talk about slowly clogging, and then it's shut down. It's the tearing away, and then bam, the person gets the heart attack right away, right? It's just from the rush of the blood, and the plaque is accumulating.
Yeah.
It gets to a certain point with any person where bam, it tears away, shuts down, and that's when the person drops to the floor.
That certainly can happen. But remember, the plaque is there because the artery got weak. And if the plaque wasn't there, now the plaque can grow and grow and grow, and that occasionally can shut things down. But more often, like you're saying, it separates, and then it causes an embolism, it causes a shutdown of the blood supply in a slightly different place from where it came from. But we still need to think of plaque. And what I like to do when I talk about plaque deposits is I like to give them a different name because they got a bad rap right now. You know, people say plaque deposits. Oh, I don't want plaque deposits. Well, of course, I don't want plaque deposits either. But I don't want to die from breakthrough bleeding. And so if I got a plaque deposit, I accept it. I try to work on not getting rid of the plaque deposit, but healing the damage underneath the plaque deposit. That's what I need to work on.
And Dan, for people listening, if this is the only thing they're listening to, they can truly, naturally, like you say, deal with the issues, the toxicity issues, the nutritional deficiencies. When they correct these things, you can literally dissolve that plaque and you can restore some health, right?
Well, let me follow up with one thing I was going to say is when I'm talking about plaque deposits, I like to give them a different name. And because plaque deposit has so many negative connotations. So I like to refer to them as nature's perfect Band-Aid, okay? Because that's what they are. They're Band-Aiding over a damaged area of an artery wall and protecting it against breakthrough bleeding. Now, what? Start me off again with what you said before.
No, just that for people listening to this for the first time, that they should realize when they are grateful, in a sense, that's kind of the message I'm hearing from you, is be grateful for that you've discovered that this is going on. Thank goodness it is there. But you really can naturally have this dissolve if you give yourself the right circumstances of avoiding the toxicity and improving your nutritional intake.
And really, there's some technical details for a plaque deposit. Such that there's a reason why that plaque deposit is there, because there was damage to the artery wall, and that creates inflammation. And the plaque deposit is actually attracted to the inflammation chemicals. So that's why it forms. It forms in proportion. So if there's more damage, there's more inflammation chemicals, and then there's a thicker plaque deposit. So
I think Western medicine is all messed up in teaching this message, as I'm listening to you, that it's not your fault, which I get. I get the idea that we don't want to judge people, and that's not what our program is about here. But what an empowering message this really is if we have this kind of conversation more with people. The plaque is building up for a reason, by design. It's supposed to happen, but you can change the equation so that it doesn't happen anymore.
Right, and you can actually, now there's two ways to change the equation. You can limit the damage, you can bring the damage down. That's actually hard to do. Okay, and because you have to change so many things in your life. Like there was a man, Dean Ornish, that focused more on bringing the damage down. He focused on emotions. He focused on a lot of different things, a lot of little changes to your life, and he was very effective. He was able to overcome heart disease in a lot of people, but you don't hear about Dean Ornish anymore. And there's a reason why, because it's so difficult. It was very difficult to get people to change that many things in their life. Now, the other approach is to raise the repair capability, which is actually much easier to get people to do. It's a collection of nutritional ideas, mostly supplements, that brings up the repair capability so that you can repair not only what got broken this week, but what got broken last year or the year before. And finally, you can catch up with all the backlog repairs. And then when the repairs are caught up, and therefore the damage is gone, the inflammation is gone, and that's the attraction. That's why the plaque deposit is there. When there's no more inflammation, the plaque deposit will go away on its own. We don't have to scrape it out. It knows when it's not needed anymore, and it will go away. And there's only one danger there, is if you healed all of a sudden and a big plaque deposit suddenly was no longer needed at that place in the artery, and it just disconnected, there would be an embolism danger. And we actually have a method for dealing with that in the Pauling therapy that will be discussed in a later session.
Yeah, I am super excited about that conversation. I hope everybody tunes into it because it's going to be mind-blowing. But just as we finish up this little talk here, Dan, thank you so much. Any other final words to all of those cardiologists out there? But you know what? Even the interns, general practitioners, all the healthcare providers out there who do have an opportunity to talk to so many people out there about their concerns about their cardiovascular system. What would you like to say to them?
Okay, well, here's a story I like to tell, because I think everybody's experienced this, okay? Because even you, Jonathan, used to be 7 years old.
For a year.
And you probably went outside and you played with your friends.
Stickball was really big, Dan, when
Okay.
I did that.
And you'd probably climb up trees and over fences and fall down and scrape your leg. And then a couple days later, it'd be, it would bleed a little bit and it'd be scabbed over. And then a couple days later, maybe you're sitting around waiting for your mother to finish dinner, it's because you were hungry and nothing else to do at the moment. And you're sitting in a chair and you're looking at your leg. And what do 7-year-olds do to scabbed over legs?
Yeah, just tear it off. Why not?
They pick at the scab. I mean, that's what they do. All of them. It's in the everybody. I did it. And then let's say your mother, just to check on you, because she knows you're sitting out there with nothing to do. She comes in and checks on you, and she looks at you, picking at the scab, and what does she say?
Stop.
Well, she says, "Don't pick at the scab." It's right out of the mother training manual, okay? And it's everywhere in the world. The only difference is language. They all say the same thing, okay? And so what I want to do is I want to take this and take a corresponding look at heart disease, okay? And there are certain actors in this and certain players that have different names in the heart disease version, but it's all very similar. So you've got damaged tissue in the artery wall or damaged tissue on your leg. Those are the corresponding parts. And there's a bleeding risk, okay? In fact, the leg bled, right? And it's got a scab. But the blood vessel could bleed if it got worse. So there's a protective covering. It's the scab. And in the blood vessel, it's the plaque deposit. And then you've got the kid picking at the scab. Well, the corresponding part to the kid picking at the scab, which is dangerous because it might bleed again or it might get infected, okay? And the corresponding part to the kid that is picking at the scab is the cardiologist. Because what he wants to do, or she, what the cardiologist wants to do is they want to get rid of that plaque deposit. Well, that's not the right answer, because then you're exposing that area to what could have happened to that artery had not the plaque deposit formed, which is possibly breakthrough bleeding. So my message to all the cardiologists and all the doctors is to listen to your mother when you were 7 years old and she told you, "Don't pick at the scab."
Dan, before I let you go, this is a really important topic. I know we've talked about what conventional Western medicine, how they look at heart disease, how you look at heart disease, the real causes, got all of that. But I know a lot of people out there are being told a baby aspirin a day is like a must. You've got cardiovascular concerns. This is like putting a vitamin into you. But I know you've got some really important information to tell people about when it comes to taking aspirin every day. Please share with us.
Well, there's a long history to aspirin therapy for heart disease, and it goes back to the 50s and 60s. They're doing autopsies on heart disease patients. They say, "Oh, there's a blood clot. We need to prevent those blood clots." And they knew that aspirin is an anticoagulant, very powerful anticoagulant. So they thought, well, okay, this is the answer. But it took them a while to get a study together, and the first place they did that was Great Britain. And these people that were backing this study I mean, they were sure it was going to work. They knew it was going to work. Problem is, didn't really work. Now, they did actually reduce the heart disease deaths, but they caused enough deaths with bleeding events to just about make up for it, and then they had a lot more bleeding events that weren't fatal, and the net result was, don't try this at home. This is not a good idea. But the people back in the study, they thought, oh no, we know it's going to work. So they set up a second study in Great Britain, and they got about the same results. Don't try this at home. So then they thought, well, we're wearing a welcome here. Let's go to the United States. So they did a study in the United States, and they figured, well, you know, more people, we'll get an accurate study this time. Then they got about the same results. And, you know, these are scientists, right? Science is about reproducible results. Well, they're getting reproducible results. They're just not paying attention. Then they went back to Great Britain, and they said, okay, we know what's wrong with the study, is these people aren't doing the study right, because they're not meticulous people. We need to get the doctors. They'll do it right, and we'll get our great result. So they did the British doctor study, and they got about the same results. But they didn't give up. They should have given up, but they didn't give up. Then they went back to the United States, because they had more doctors, and they did a doctor study in the United States. And this was in the middle 80s. And then in December of 1987, they stopped the study because they felt it was unethical to deprive the control group of this wonderful results that they had. Okay? Now you remember, now this is, the first 4 studies were no good. And this is the first one, maybe the only one, that ever produced a positive result. And I was actually watching the 6 o'clock news routinely at that time, and I remember 20 minutes on the 6 o'clock news. They interviewed everybody. They repeated themselves 5 times. Everybody should be taking aspirin therapy to prevent heart attack. And, and this became the study on which telling the entire world that aspirin therapy works to prevent heart attacks. Okay? After 4 failed studies, 1 good one. But in the 20 minutes on the 6 o'clock news and in the summary on the published journal article, there's a couple things they didn't tell you. The first thing was there was no change in mortality. Like for the other studies, there was fewer heart attack deaths, but there was more bleeding deaths. But the reason why they were so excited was because there was a 44% reduction in non-fatal heart attacks. But you can't complain there. I would rather not have a non-fatal heart attack than have a non-fatal heart attack. So we'll give them a little check mark there. They did something good. But there was one other little detail that you had to dig really deep in the study to find out. And you had to do some additional research after digging in the study. Is in this study that became the basis for everybody across the world taking aspirin therapy to prevent heart attack, they didn't use aspirin.
What?
Yeah, well, they used something that contained aspirin, but it also contained other things. They used bufferin. Now, bufferin is buffered, so it's less acidic, it's less irritating to the stomach, but the more important factor is that bufferin also, the buffering minerals, there was a significant dosage of magnesium. Now, we've already gone through, okay, or in a later part when we go through the therapy, we're going to find out that magnesium is the #1 mineral for the heart. And if you're doing a study on aspirin and you're putting magnesium in there as a buffering agent, you need to start thinking about what's really going on.
And just to be clear, those other 4 studies, there was none of this magnesium as part of the
no magnesium
cocktail.
in the studies that failed. They should have looked at this and said, what's the difference between the 4 studies that failed and this study? And they should have said, well, it was also had some calcium in it. They said it's either the calcium or the magnesium. And if they'd done that, they would have set up a separate study. What they should have done is set a separate study with a higher dose of magnesium, a significantly higher dose, and no aspirin. They would have got a very good result.
Wow.
But they didn't do it. They just told everybody aspirin therapy is the way to go. So suddenly aspirin was on top of the world. But they didn't quit doing studies. And that's a good thing. Because as time went on, they started to discover, well, yeah, we thought aspirin was pretty great in 1988 when they reported the study, but it doesn't seem to be quite as good now. And they started scaling back the recommendations for aspirin. And it started out as a 325 milligram aspirin. It went down to 100, then it went down to 81, which is about a quarter of the original dose, because they kept having too many bleed problems. Then they said, well, it's not really for the prevention of a first heart attack, only if you've already had a heart attack, for the prevention of a second one. And then they said, it's not for people over 70 years, because it doesn't work so well then. And it's not for people that drink alcohol regularly, and it's not for people that have diabetes. And it's not for younger people, maybe under 40 or so. And the trend line started out way down here, and then it went way up suddenly at 1988, and then ever since then, the trend line for aspirin has been heading back down to where it started, which was, don't try this at home. But I think they just haven't put the last few dots on the line on the graph yet.
They know.
And they'll eventually get there. But for those few people left in the world to still fit all those categories that are not excluded by any of those exclusions, that are still taking aspirin therapy, what's my bottom line? Okay. Well, I would tell them, if you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, you should pick a very small caliber bullet.
Dan, it's a powerful message. I hope people listen to this actually 2 or 3 times, because I know they're going to get 2 or 3 times more out of this conversation. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Up next, Dr. Cobb continues his presentation about a heart rescue therapy that's been censored for years. As you probably know by now, plaque always gets created within damaged arteries, but with the right nutritional protocol, you'll discover how to dissolve plaque deposits naturally in a safe and effective way. In addition, sadly, conventional heart therapies actually increase the risk of congestive heart failure. Dr. Cobb will show you how to effectively restore your heart energy by improving your blood circulation. And finally, in order to fix damaged arteries and heal the heart, you'll need more nutritional energy. So Dr. Cobb will detail his 13-part protocol to reverse damaged blood vessels and heart tissue. Enjoy this presentation with Dr. Daniel Cobb. Okay, Dan, I know this one, a lot of people are tuning in to listen carefully about. Just give me what the Pauling therapy is. But just for a couple minutes, give us the basics, just a little bit of the history of the Pauling therapy. Where did this come from for people who don't even know who is Pauling?
Okay. So, Linus Pauling, PhD, and he isn't just a PhD. He is the PhD. He was the most famous scientist of his age. I mean, he was, you could not criticize him. Not because he was a power mad guy, but because he did things that nobody else was doing. And he worked with a man, with an MD, Matthias Rath, on this particular item. In 1991, they got a hold of some research from Germany. And, one more thing about Linus Pauling before we go on. He is the only person ever to get 2 unshared Nobel Prizes.
Just a little side note on Linus Pauling, but thank you for mentioning it. Good.
Yeah. So Pauling and Rath got this research data, and they filtered through it, and they came up with a paper, and they got it published in a very prestigious peer-reviewed journal, and it was about the cure for heart disease. I mean, and this was, in Pauling and Rath's view, this was the end. This was the end of this disease. And at a later, well, I can actually read you the conclusion to Pauling and Rath's 1992 paper. In this paper, we present a unified theory of human cardiovascular disease. This disease is the direct consequence of the inability of man to synthesize ascorbate. Now, that's vitamin C, ascorbate is vitamin C, and people do not synthesize their own vitamin C. There's only a few animals that don't make their own vitamin C. Primates, fruit bats, guinea pigs, and a few fish. All the other animals make vitamin C in their liver. But therefore, people need to consume enough vitamin C to meet all their needs because they can no longer make it. And then in combination with insufficient intake of ascorbate in the modern diet. So he's saying the modern diet is deficient in vitamin C, and that's why we're getting heart disease. Since ascorbate deficiency is the common cause of human cardiovascular disease, ascorbate supplementation is the universal treatment for this disease. The available epidemiological and clinical evidence is reasonably convincing. That's a sentence that every, study has to have in it for some reason, but meaningless. But now here's the real sentence that should stun you. Further clinical confirmation of this theory should lead to the abolition of cardiovascular disease as a cause of human mortality for the present and future generations of mankind.
That's a bombshell statement.
Yeah, and they thought they had it. They thought they had it absolutely nailed. They went around and did a few speaking engagements just to pump up the readership of this article, but they thought, I can see them coming out of their last speaking engagement thinking, done with that disease, because in 2 years everybody's going to do it our way. Well, it didn't quite work. And I'll tell you the reason why is their way of treating heart disease was so easy to understand and so cheap to do and so effective that doctors couldn't make any money from it.
Dan, a lot of people watching this, they get it, but I think it's still, just between you and me, something that's really hard for people to hear. Big pharma's greedy, they're only trying to control the whole industry. The American Medical Association is a lobby group just for doctors, and they don't really care about the welfare of people. They just want to protect their own interests. People hear this stuff, but I think most people, like what you were just saying, this is clearly incredible stuff. We're going to detail exactly what people can do very inexpensively. But between you and me, the bottom line is I think most people would never do this, right? Like most people as humans, if we found something this incredible, we'd want to tell the world.
Yeah.
But they're trying to keep this really quiet.
Yeah. And the experience of people in my position that are promoting this therapy is the effective way to promote it is to the patients, not the doctors.
Exactly.
And
that's
so
why I have,
that's why we're doing this today.
is exactly it, Dan. That's why I'm so grateful you made the trip all the way across the country to do this. Outline this for us, please. Let's break this down, because it's not just about just what most people hear about vitamin C. 500 milligrams, go to the local pharmacy or store, pop 500 milligrams. Hey, I take vitamin C. And again, all due respect to everyone who said that to me, Dan, I'm sure you've heard it too.
Yeah.
A lot of people out there say, oh yeah, I take vitamin C, no problem. 500, 1,000 milligrams. Please stay focused, right, for everybody listening. We're talking about people with cardiovascular concerns, real damage to their cardiovascular system. We are not talking about, I'm sure people are going to hear this loud and clear from you, we're not talking about people just going out and taking 500 milligrams of vitamin C and they're done.
Yeah. Now this, like you said, this is about people with advanced cardiovascular disease and blockages. And, you know, for preventative things, we have different dosages, which we'll get to later. But first, and we'll start off with the headliner. This is commonly referred to as a vitamin C therapy. So we're going to start out with vitamin C. Somewhere between 6 and 12 grams of vitamin C. A gram is 1,000 milligrams, so 6,000 to 12,000 milligrams. And first thing you want to understand is that, let's say you're going to take 12 grams of vitamin C. You don't wake up in the morning and take 12 grams of vitamin C. Otherwise, in an hour, you'll be in the bathroom with diarrhea. Because if you take too much vitamin C at one time, yes, that's what you're going to get. And you'll be wasting the vitamin C because you didn't have time to absorb it. The correct way to take vitamin C is take a little bit in small, and throughout the day, as often as you can. If you can divide it into 2 doses, that's better than 1. If you can divide it into 4 doses, that's better than 2. If you can divide it into 6 or 8 doses, that's even better. I even tell my heart disease patients that if you tend to get up at night to go to the bathroom, have some vitamin C by your nightstand with a glass of water and take that vitamin C at night, because then you're covering more time. The thing about vitamin C is it's a very reactive molecule, and it needs to be reactive. That's why we need it, is because it's reactive. But it doesn't stop being reactive just because we're good people and we take it. It reacts away, and the half-life, once vitamin C gets in your bloodstream, the half-life is 30 minutes.
Right, so it's important what you're bringing up is that our need for vitamin C, you can't get away from it. It's throughout the day, so you really should be streaming it into you throughout the day.
That's right. But any vitamin C that you take, because the half-life is 30 minutes, it's all gone in 4 hours. All gone. So if you don't take it at least every 4 hours, there's some hours in the day that are not covered. And when you're treating heart disease, you really want to cover all 24 hours if you can. We don't want to wake you up in the middle of a sound sleep to get you to take vitamin C. But if you happen to wake up, it's a good thing to take some before you go to sleep. If you wake up in the middle of the night, take some more, and then take it throughout the day.
This is a great point, and also back to our conversation we had before that I encourage people to listen to our other conversation. The idea that, if you're taking the C a little bit at a time throughout the day, you're going to be countering the toxicities that are always in your body. We're talking to people with cardiovascular issues. There's most certainly heavy metal toxicities, chemical toxicities. All of these things are present in the body. So why wouldn't you want to keep streaming it into you throughout the day?
Yeah, well, you should. I mean, whether you have heart disease or not, it's a good idea. It's hard to go wrong with vitamin C. But now, I want to tell you a few more things about vitamin C. If you get a bottle of vitamin C from a local drugstore or a grocery store, and you look on the back, it'll say ascorbic acid, 500 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams, something like that. But you need to understand that there's two kinds of ascorbic acid. There's L-ascorbic acid and there's D-ascorbic acid. Now, nature only makes L-ascorbic acid. That's vitamin C. And if you get a food source vitamin C, that's L-ascorbic acid. That's vitamin C. But food source vitamin C has a problem in that it's hard to get high doses. We are talking about high doses here.
Right, when people out there say, oh, it's nice about vitamin C, but I'll just get it from oranges, fruits and vegetables, camu.
Yeah.
It's a lot you're going to have to eat.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to get, well, I don't think you'd be able to get 12 grams of vitamin C from oranges. You'd need to get maybe 2 bushel baskets full of oranges. Okay, and that's just, it's not going to happen. So, and then even the food source vitamin C that comes in capsules or tablets is still low dose. So you'd need to take some of these vitamin C's that are food source, you need to take the whole bottle to get 12 grams. Or even if you're taking 6 grams, well, you're taking 2/3 of a bottle.
Oh, that's important. Let's stop on that point for a moment. A lot of people think food grade vitamin C supplementation in these bottles, it's very expensive, but the amount of vitamin C per serving is so small.
Yeah. So almost everybody that does the Pauling therapy uses synthetic vitamin C. And there's nothing wrong with synthetic vitamin C, except, well, there's one factor that needs to be known about, because when you synthesize vitamin C in a laboratory, you get half L-ascorbic acid, that would be left-handed ascorbic acid, and you get a half right-handed ascorbic acid, that's a D-ascorbic acid, and the D-ascorbic acid is a useless molecule. The only redeeming factor is that it's water soluble, so it's easy to get rid of. So if you go down to a drugstore and you just get something that says vitamin C, and it's 1 gram capsules, and it doesn't say anything about L-ascorbic acid on the label, you're getting half a gram of real vitamin C and half a gram of D-ascorbic acid, which is not vitamin C. So if you're using that and you're trying to do, let's say, 10 grams, you need 20 grams of that. But the problem with the D-ascorbic acid is it is an acid, and it creates it adds to the acidity problems and therefore the diarrhea problems. So there's a real value to looking for L-ascorbic acid so you can build the higher dosages without getting too much acidity and causing too much diarrhea.
And Dan, just correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to complicate things here.
Okay.
But the idea that each and every person out there listening to, isn't it a game of art in a sense, how much the people are going to be able to absorb? Too, is the digestive system, the medicines they're taking, the toxic loads they have, the damage to their body. So now here we are talking about the sheer number on the outside, in your hand, in a glass, whatever, on a spoon, taking it in, but then absorbing it, it's a whole other ballgame, right?
Yes, because if you take too much, diarrhea means you didn't absorb it. Now, I want to throw out one more idea about vitamin C, because there's another form that can be very valuable, and it can raise your vitamin C levels significantly as long as cost is not a problem, and that's liposomal vitamin C. Liposomes are, you take a little vitamin C and then you surround it with a fatty substance. In my experience is very often sunflower lecithin. And what that does is it keeps the vitamin C. See, when you take vitamin C, let's say a capsule or a powder, it goes in and it starts, once that capsule breaks, it starts reacting. Even before it gets into your bloodstream, it starts reacting. And what we need for it to do is get in your bloodstream. That's where it's going to do the real good. But a lot of these vitamin C's that are taken orally, by the time they actually get to the stomach, which is where they start absorbing, and then the intestines, where they finish absorbing, they've lost maybe 80-85% of their, 80-85% has already been reacted, so it's no longer vitamin C anymore. So you're getting maybe a sixth of what you would have gotten, what you got put in your mouth, you get a sixth. And a lot of people would think, well, gee, I'm done taking vitamin C if most of it's no good. But the truth is that sixth of whatever dose you took is worth its weight in gold. Once it gets in your bloodstream, it's worth it. Take the vitamin C. Don't be so disappointed that you're losing most of it along the way, because the part that makes it is incredibly valuable.
And I know I don't want to get too far off topic because we're trying to stay focused on the entire therapy, but just to validate what you're saying, people with a serious life-threatening blood infection, sepsis, the formulas and the protocols that are used to save people's lives by one physician in particular, who I won't mention now, people can do their own research, it wasn't that much. So just a small amount, like you were saying, can make a huge difference.
Okay.
So go ahead.
But anyway, now we get back to the liposomes. Liposomes, that coating, that fatty coating, makes it non-reactive. So you get it in your mouth, doesn't react, down the esophagus, into the stomach, doesn't react. It's not losing any of its vitamin C capability. Then it gets into your intestines, and because it's coated with fat, it's going through the lymph system. Then it gets into the lymph system, and it cycles around, and it comes out below the clavicles. And maybe sometimes before it gets in to this point where it joins the bloodstream, it loses its fatty coat. But almost all of the liposomal C makes it into your bloodstream. And so that the liposomal C, gram for gram that you take in your mouth, is probably worth 6 times what the other forms of vitamin C are worth, by dose.
Yeah, bottom line is you're delivering more quantity of vitamin C into your blood where you need it the most.
Right. And now the problem with this is it does cost usually about 5 or 6 times as much. So it's an expense. If you can afford the expense, this is a great way to lift your blood vitamin C levels.
And not that it's very practical for a lot of people, but just to throw it out there, what about IV vitamin C as part of all this?
Well, IV vitamin C is probably the most expensive way to get your blood levels up. And because you've got to have somebody that's licensed that can afford the equipment to deliver the vitamin C via IV. And the real cost in this is the person with the license and then the equipment. The vitamin C is very cheap. So yes, you can get the highest levels of vitamin C or blood via IV, but it is gram for gram, or even the effective grams in your bloodstream, the most expensive way to do it. And the best way to do it for heart disease is, if you're doing an IV, is to get the IV and then dump in a couple grams per hour. The way IVs are typically done is they have a certain dosage. It might be 25, it might be 50, it might be 100 grams, and they put it all in an hour and a half. And that's okay, that's worthwhile, but it's not the best way to do it for heart disease. You need this continuous supply.
So besides the vitamin C, what else is there as part of the Pauling therapy?
Yeah, well, the original Linus Pauling version of the formula was vitamin C and lysine. And then very quickly thereafter, L-proline, there's L-lysine and L-proline got added. And these lysine and proline are part of the strands of collagen fibers. So you might think, oh yeah, you're providing the stock for creating these collagen fibers, and that's really not the reason. Most people get enough from their diet of lysine and proline to make the collagen fibers. It's the vitamin C that tends to be the deficient part of the production. But lysine and proline have another effect that they deliver, another valuable effect. And let's imagine that this is a picture of an artery, a perfectly healthy artery, and then you get damage. And the fibers are broken, and the ends are sticking up, and there's damage, and there's inflammation, and then you get a plaque deposit. And the plaque deposit will attach to these things that are sticking up. And then as you heal, remember what we said is you don't want to heal everything and let the whole thing go at one time. So as you heal and the damage starts to heal, you get less inflammation. That's one little place. You still got inflammation and damage there. What you want is you want to compete for the attachment sites. You know, these were attachment sites, and as they're healing, you want to compete. And these are either strands of glycine, lysine, or proline. So you want to have those things that can attach there, that compete for those sites. And so in a microscopic level, it's competing for the attachment sites. But if you could look at a healing artery with time-lapse photography, and so you could look at 3 weeks worth of healing in 5 minutes, you'd look at that film and say, oh, the plaque deposit is melting. Because it's being, by competing for the attachment sites, it's being sent away in very tiny little pieces that are not dangerous. The next thing, and this is when I first ran into this therapy, there was 4 things. It was the lysine, proline, vitamin C, and vitamin E. And vitamin E, once again, is a complex subject. I hate to say it, but you can't just go down to a drugstore and say, let's get some, or even a health food store, and just get something that says vitamin E. Because vitamin E is 8 different chemical names that are naturally occurring, plus one that's synthetic, and in this case, synthetic is really bad, really useless stuff. So the naturally occurring kinds are tocopherols. There's 4 of those, alpha, gamma, beta, and delta. And there's also alpha, gamma, beta, and delta tocotrienols. And what we want all 8 kinds. But the kind that's most important for heart disease is gamma tocopherol. Now, if you just go down to the drugstore and you get something that says vitamin E, and you look on the back, you're going to see one chemical name, and it's almost always guaranteed to be D-alpha tocopherol, which doesn't help. It doesn't help. It's not what your body needs for heart disease. So, and also you have to know that there's a displacement effect in vitamin E. But your bloodstream has all these different kinds of vitamin E, and your arteries are looking, oh, there's a vitamin E. Oh, no, it's the wrong kind. Oh, no, that one's the wrong kind too. And so if you take D-alpha tocopherol, you're flooding your bloodstream with the kind that your arteries don't need. So it's even harder. Even though there is some gamma tocopherol in there, it makes it harder for them to find it. And so what you really need for heart disease is the best arrangement is all 8 kinds naturally occurring, but with high gamma tocopherol. And you can find it because there's enough people doing this therapy that have been pounding on the doors of supplement makers that they got the message. And there's 3 or 4 companies that do this. And should I name one?
Yes, before we get ahead of ourselves, Dan, please mention some of the ones that we should go for.
And I don't usually like to mention brand names, but actually in this case, it can make a difference because there is one company that stands sort of head and shoulders above the rest in terms of vitamin E quality, and that is AC Grace. and they make a product called Unique E, and it comes in 2 bottles, so you should get both bottles. And it's the Unique E tocopherols, and they're high gamma tocopherols. It's the one they most often sell because most of the people that are buying it are doing this therapy. And the Unique E tocotrienols.
And you say Grace, Grace?
Grace. AC, the initials, Grace, and the product name is Unique E, and then there's 2 subvarieties, tocopherols and tocotrienols.
Okay, thank you. So you did just mention then the original Pauling therapy, these 4 elements.
So when I got to it,
Yep.
right, which was a book by Matthias Rath. Now, since then, I've added many things, but I have added them in the same with the same ideas that Pauling and Rath originally had. They want a nutritional answer. They want it to be inexpensive. They want it to be easy to do and easy to understand. And I think I've pretty much stuck with that. Now, the next thing that I have on my list is coenzyme Q10. Now, coenzyme Q10 is used to create extra energy in cells. And, well, we can think of one muscle that needs a lot of energy because it needs to continue to beat 60 to 80 times a minute for, we hope, a lot of decades at a time.
And just to jump in for a moment, because we've mentioned it on other conversations as well, but in case someone's just listening to this alone, this is hugely important because a lot of people with cardiovascular disease are taking statins, cholesterol-lowering medication,
Right.
which is really having a negative impact on the amount of CoQ10
Right.
available in the body.
It shuts down part of the production. Depends on dose. And now coenzyme Q10, you shouldn't be worried about coenzyme Q10 to some degree because it's a naturally occurring molecule. I mean, when you're 20 years old, you got enough. But as you age, your production of coenzyme Q10 gradually drops off, so that by the time you get to be old enough to actually have this heart disease, and when you have heart disease, you also tend to get high blood pressure. So when your heart is trying to push that blood out into the aorta, there's more back pressure. So the moment when you need more coenzyme Q10, you have less. And especially like Jonathan said, if you're taking a statin drug, you even need more coenzyme Q10.
Wow, you talked about that in a really clear way, thinking about how the body, as we get older, if we're not having the best lifestyle, which is happening to millions and millions of people,
Yeah.
they're struggling so hard at that point. Microscopic, cellular level stuff. And that's when we need more energy. But unfortunately, that's the vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Our energy is going down, and we're breaking apart where we need more energy to repair and survive.
Yeah.
So this CoQ10 is really important.
And with the statin drug thing, that's the unfortunate part about heart disease is a lot of times you go in with heart disease and you get conventional treatment, and the first drug they prescribe actually weakens your heart. And what they've done, what the result of this, and you have to understand what the bad result of not having the coenzyme Q10 is your heart can't push the blood out, and so the fluids back up into your lung and you get congestive heart failure. So what they've done is they've said, oh, let's try and reduce the cholesterol, and what they've traded for a dubious idea that cholesterol is dangerous. They've reduced the cholesterol and traded for that an epidemic of congestive heart failure.
Dan, I couldn't agree with you more. In all the years when I was in private work, seeing people one-on-one, the older people that were on blood pressure lowering medication and the cholesterol lowering medication, the toxicity that I saw in those people, their bodily functions going downhill, they were, so many of them, because my background was also in exercise physiology, and I could see how they were having trouble literally breathing and energetically moving around drowning in their own fluids really slowly.
Yeah. Now, coenzyme Q10 comes in two forms. And this is just an observation based on my muscle testing. You know, if you read the documents, there's coenzyme Q10, and then there's another form called ubiquinol, which theoretically should be twice as effective, dose for dose. But when I muscle test it, I always come up better with coenzyme Q10. I've only had one occasion where a patient tested positive for ubiquinol. And I'm inclined to agree with the papers, the technical papers that say that ubiquinol should be twice as effective as coenzyme Q10. But I also guess that ubiquinol is a smaller market, therefore has fewer manufacturing locations. It might only be one or two manufacturing locations in the whole world. And if they have a manufacturing problem, then it's going to affect the whole world's supply. And right now, that's my opinion. Ubiquinol in the whole world is not worth buying. I hope it changes. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that my observations change, because I would like to have a version of coenzyme Q10 that's twice as effective per dose. But I don't find it right now. And I don't take ubiquinol. And like I say, I haven't recommended any ubiquinol except for one patient.
Okay, besides the vitamin C, though, as we're going along here, do you want to mention typical amounts that you tell people? Are we going to get to that later?
Coenzyme Q10? Oh, well, let's go for vitamin E.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to the lysine and proline. Lysine, 6 grams per day. Proline, 1 gram per day. Okay? Now, we already did the vitamin C. The vitamin E, typically, it's going to come in a gel cap, and typically it's going to be 1 gel cap per day. Usually with a meal that contains fat. But if it comes in very small dosages, you want to get somewhere between 400 and 800 IUs, and sometimes it's in milligrams. Sometimes the D-alpha tocopherol is in international units, and the rest of it's in milligrams. But it's roughly about the same. Whatever 1 gel cap is probably the right answer, unless you're taking the AC Grace, in which it's 2 gel caps.
And again, not to scare off people with heart disease, but you did say that the vitamin E does get helped to get in where it belongs by having some fat with it.
Correct? Oh, yes. Fat-soluble vitamins need fat to help it absorb. In fact, almost all minerals and all fat-soluble vitamins, which actually only leaves out vitamin B and vitamin C. Everything else needs fat to help it absorb. And then coenzyme Q10, I usually go for about 200 milligrams per day, but you can take more if you want. The first overdose symptom of coenzyme Q10 is financial. So, which means you think it costs too much. So if you want to take 400, take 400. If you want to take 800, take 800. It's not going to hurt you.
Well, that's a lot of people think that as well. What about people who are taking medications? Is this whole therapy dangerous in any way if people are taking blood pressure medication, cholesterol-lowering drugs? What's your experience?
Well, my experience is I actually worked out a significant part of this, but vitamin C will detoxify any poison. And your body believes that any drug is a poison. Even if you want to take it, even if you need to take it, even if it's really helping you, your body thinks that drug is a poison. And it will try to detoxify it. And the vitamin C will be a part of that. And so, yes, there can be a problem there. Now, typically, with drugs that are taken on a daily basis, I have not encountered a problem with 6 to 12 grams of vitamin C per day. Now, if you had a drug that was maybe injected once every month, okay, then there might be a greater problem there. Now, I will admit I have not run into that, but I would expect that eventually I would.
Okay. And then so other parts to your version of the Pauling therapy?
Okay. Next thing is magnesium. Magnesium is the number one mineral for the heart because, well, you got two parts, two minerals that are big for the heart, and calcium. Calcium is contraction. Magnesium is relaxation. Okay? So contract, relax, calcium, magnesium. Now, calcium is in a very tight range. It's very small because you have systems in place for anything that gets out of that range. If you get too much calcium, your kidneys are going to urinate it out. Or you'll put it in bone. And then if you get not enough, then your parathyroid glands will release a hormone. It'll go break up some bone, and then until the calcium gets up to the normal level within that very tight range. Now, so calcium is never a problem. Contraction is never a problem. The relaxation is the problem because there is not a store of magnesium that can be released upon demand when magnesium levels get low. You've got to take it. You've got to take it frequently, at least every day, and sometimes more often.
Would you say that a lot of people out there, am I understating this, are deficient in magnesium?
Yeah, you're understating it. I would say almost everyone. If you're not taking a magnesium supplement, the odds are about 19 out of 20 that you are deficient. That, in fact, I would say magnesium is the first or second most deficient mineral in the whole population.
And what on average would you say is a good amount for people to take?
About 400 milligrams, and some people may need more by body weight. But the key thing is you don't absorb all the magnesium. So you've got to get a form that's pretty good for absorption, and there's a couple choices here. Now there's a bad choice, magnesium oxide. That's pretty much for constipation because it hardly absorbs at all, and it stays in your intestinal tract, but it draws water, so it's good for constipation. But the forms that are actually good for heart disease are either maybe citrate, malate, glycinate, and here's the real good one, but it's hard to find. It's chloride. Magnesium chloride is among the best, but for some reason, it's very hard to find in the United States. In foreign countries, it's far more popular. Now the next thing is, and if magnesium, along with vitamin C, can cause diarrhea if you get too much. So you want to separate the doses. And there are some people, even when they separate the doses, that they can't get away from the diarrhea. So then you got to think back to vitamin C and say, well, I want more of the liposomal C because that contributes very little to diarrhea. And on the magnesium front, you also have the option of magnesium oil, which is something you put on your skin and you absorb through the skin, so it doesn't go through the intestinal tract and it can't cause diarrhea. The next thing is zinc and copper. Zinc and copper, sort of like magnesium, calcium, they do different things. Zinc and copper have opposing functions in that if you get too much zinc, it suppresses the copper function. Too much copper suppresses the zinc function. So we need them both. It's like Republicans and Democrats. And so when they're in balance is when they're at their best. And because zinc is necessary for any repair of tissue. And copper is necessary for the production of collagen fibers, which we absolutely need for this therapy. So the right ratio is somewhere between 10 to 1 and 15 to 1 in favor of zinc. Zinc is always the higher level nutrient. But there are some exceptions. Let's say you're a vegan, not just a vegetarian that eats, eggs and cheese and drinks milk, but a vegan. Like if it came from an animal, I ain't touching it. okay? Those people are high in copper and they're low in zinc. So they should take 40 milligrams of zinc and no copper. Now, the opposite of that would be, let's say, the meatitarian that thinks that any vegetable other than a potato is a garnish that's supposed to be left on the plate. Well, he's going to be very high in zinc and very low in copper. So that person might take 3 milligrams of copper and only 15 milligrams of zinc. Also, if you have a really old house and it still has the copper pipes, not those PVC pipes, the white plastic stuff, they haven't been replaced yet. If you have any acidity in the water, that's going to give you enough copper, and maybe you don't need any copper at all. The next thing is vitamin K, and this is a point of contention between me and many other people that do nutritional treatments for heart disease, is magnesium and vitamin E create, are anticoagulants, very mild blood thinners. Vitamin K, it was discovered in Germany, and it was named vitamin K because coagulate in German is spelled with a K, and that's what it does. It's a coagulant. And so for me, vitamin K is to neutralize the blood thinning effect of vitamin E and magnesium, because I want to be able to work with patients who are simultaneously taking more generic, cardiology treatments. And I want to say, and blood thinning is the most contentious thing. So I do not want to get into discussions with a lot of cardiologists about the pros and cons of blood thinning. I just want to present my therapy as blood thinning neutral and leave it at that.
So, but just to not skip over this point, which I think is an important one.
Yeah.
If people are taking blood thinners, conventional cardiology is telling them to take this, they're doing it, they want to do the Pauling therapy, but now they're nervous about taking the K. Can it be left out? Do you still say, look, you got to take this, or don't do the Pauling therapy at all? Where do you stand with all that?
You could reduce the blood thinning dose drug that you're taking by a little bit and skip the K. And then you have to, that's a difficult thing. You have to look at, did you reduce it enough? Because if you get too much blood thinners, you're going to start bleeding. You start getting purple in the hand, black in the hands, and things like that.
That's so important. I think a lot of people who are taking those blood thinners, really, with all due respect, Dan, I don't think a lot of them understand what's going on.
I don't think they do.
They're bleeding out inside.
That's right.
And you see all those marks
and
on
you see
older people's arms.
the black hands.
They're bleeding.
They're bleeding internally, and the hands are just the part of it. It's what you see. If you're bleeding on the back of your hand, you're bleeding internally too, and that's worse.
And these people are being tested on a fairly regular basis. I know these people out there. Over all my years working with them, they would go check, make sure everything's okay, and the doctors would say, that's fine, keep taking it. And I'd see the marks all over.
One of my very first patients came to one of my very first talks. He had the black spots on his hand. And he asked me, and he was very logical, listening to my talk. And he said, well, if this stops the bleeding and this is bleeding, will this therapy stop the black hand effect? And I said, yes, probably about the same time that it will help your heart. And he talked to me about 6 months later, and he said, yes, it did. They both went, pardon the pun, but hand in hand.
Yeah. And so how much K are we looking at normally?
About 100 micrograms.
Okay, and then is there anything else as part of the therapy?
Well, yeah. Well, you need some sulfur, but you don't need a supplement. That's easy to do it. Eggs, cruciferous vegetables, kale, mustard greens, whatever you want. Just, you need some every day. So don't eat a bunch of these things one day and then skip 4 days and then not do anything. every day eat something that has sulfur. Sulfur links those fibers together, holds them together so that the vitamin C can twist them and link them, cross-link them, and then it becomes a real fiber.
It's the same logic to what you started with this whole therapy about streaming it into the body on a regular basis. If you're not going to be consistent, you're not going to get the result that you're looking for.
Yeah. And now the next thing is B-complex. And B-complex and magnesium are very important in turning food into energy. So when you're healing, you need more energy. Not to be running around and splitting wood and doing push-ups and things like that. You get energy just to heal, just to sit in a chair and be healed takes energy. And so, yeah, these are very important. But the B complex has another function in that there's a molecule that's very dangerous for your blood vessels. It's called homocysteine. And if there's too much of it, it creates additional damage, in the artery walls. So, but vitamin B6, B12, and methylfolate all neutralize homocysteine. Down to, they turn it into, metabolize it into something else that's not dangerous.
And not to get off topic too much, but it's a simple blood test. You can see if you have high homocysteine levels.
Right.
This is really telling, your body's trying to tell you something.
Yeah, you need
you
need B complex.
Yeah.
Yeah. You take it as a B complex deficiency. Another thing is rutin. I write it down as rutin with bioflavonoids. Okay. Now, rutin is a bioflavonoid, but it's the one bioflavonoid that is most specific for vascular tissue. And bioflavonoids are just like, see, vitamin C is for outside the cell. Bioflavonoids are for inside the cell. And you want to cover both sides. And you want your bioflavonoids to be heavy on the rutin side because that's the part that affects the vascular tissue the most. Take about 2 grams a day, but in divided doses. And the last thing is some kind of omega-3 fatty acid. Some people go with flaxseed, some people use hemp seed, some people use fish oil. I actually use algae oil, okay, because algae oil is where the fish get their oil, so it's lower on the food chain. It's likely to be less contaminated when you go lower on the food chain. And things from, I also use hemp seed oil because it's, the algae oil, I alternate them because the algae oil has the DHA and the EPA. The hemp seed oil has, not quite the high-end, omega-3s, but it's more pure because it never came from the ocean. The ocean is contaminated, and you can't avoid that. The only thing you do is try to minimize it. And so right now I'm going through some algae oil, and when I finish that bottle, I'll go through about 3 bottles of hemp seed oil before I do another bottle of algae oil.
And I'm sorry, how much of this should be taken?
And somewhere around 1 teaspoon. I would say some people go as much as 1 tablespoon, but I think that's a little high. I would go more, maybe half a tablespoon, which I think is more than a teaspoon. But the thing is, the more of the highly volatile oil you get inside you, okay, and you need that. You need some of that. But the problem with these highly unsaturated oils is they go rancid. And just because you're smart and you know you need them and you found a really good source for it and you put it in your mouth intelligently, doesn't mean they're not going to go rancid inside your body. Now, the major thing that will prevent it from going rancid is vitamin E. So, with this therapy, you're in good shape, especially if you're taking the AC Grace vitamin E, you're in good shape to protect that highly, unsaturated fatty acid. But you can't just put infinite amounts in.
So let's continue this just a little bit more and talk a bit about cost, some of the side effects, things like this.
Okay, all right. So the cost of this supplementation, and I'm not including doctor visits because a lot of times We don't have doctor visits, okay? I mean, I actually had, I do talks like this back in Santa Fe frequently, and I don't do it's an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and it's a much smaller scale thing. But I want to have them, I give them a handout that's everything they need to know to do the therapy, because really, when I'm giving a talk, I want them to listen to me, to look at me, to engage with me, ask questions, be thinking. I don't want them taking notes. So I give them a handout. And somebody who didn't even come to my talk got a copy of the handout, and he took it home and read it and said, okay, yeah, this sounds good, because I got heart disease. And just with that 4-page handout, he did what it said, and a month later, he didn't have heart disease.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed day 3 of the Cardiovascular Docu class. Stay tuned, because we still have 5 more days of amazing content. By the way, if you would like a copy of these episodes plus all the other presentations offered inside the Cardiovascular Docu class, simply click the link below and choose the package you want, including some really valuable bonuses. Talk to you soon. Take care.